Precons in Magic the Gathering are a beautiful thing. They allow newer players to get right into the game with a fully constructed deck, sleeve it up, and start playing Magic. Typically, most precons hold their value, and for the most part are built somewhat decently. But what happens if you look at these precons and you're not a huge fan of what they offer? Sometimes a lot of precons have some stuff in it that is just not your style. Maybe you're just not a huge fan of the colors. Maybe you're not a huge fan of the overall strategy. There's plenty of reasons not to want to buy a precon, especially as their prices go up and up and up. So today I've brought you a list of 5 different commander decks I've made, all with under $100 budget. These decks vary in their strategy. These decks are easily upgradable if you ever want to, but these decks are also extremely effective at what they do, with very nice mana curves that are optimized for casual play, as well as a very clear game plan and easy to digest fundamental gameplay. These decks can not only compete with higher power decks, but will also be able to contend with most other precons, and in most cases beat those other precons pretty well. So if you're looking for some deck ideas that are super effective but also won't break the bank, let's get into it. Kaseto Orochi Archmage is a hybrid aggro plus Voltron commander deck. We have a lot of snake themes put into the deck with a bit of the best valuable snakes that you could possibly get. These snakes either help you ramp, help you draw cards, and sometimes can even be used as a counterspell. We have a bit of the tribal payoffs put in here, with the most expensive card being Seshiro, the Anointed, which just helps you draw even more cards, and is also a very good anthem for all your creatures. This is a very flexible deck, as you're mostly swinging out with your commander and buffing the commander with his own ability. You make it so that Kaseto can't be blocked, but for only 2 mana, you can pump him as well. Because you're on more of the slower side, we have quite a bit of interaction also, running about 19 spells that are a combination of removal, protection, and counterspells. All of these are to ensure that our commander is as safe as possible at all times. We then run quite a few combat tricks, just a few cards that will help buff him up a little bit at a time. The goal of the deck is to focus on one player at a time while using your other snakes to defend yourself from other players. In fact, in our removal package, we own a Winged Colto and an Ambush Viper, which can be used as pseudo-combat tricks that can help protect your commander. We then have a nice and smooth ramp package, and we have quite a few cards that can help us draw more, with the most expensive being Kindred Discovery. The overall game plan of the deck is to cast your Kaseto on turn 3 or 4 and start swinging towards one player. Your goal will be to swing at the player who's either furthest ahead or a player who you know's game plan will do better against yours, aka someone that's going really wide. You're not too worried about someone going big, as you do have a lot of death touchers and spot removal, but people that are going wide, those are your number 1 targets. Next on your target list would probably be any burn decks. You don't really have a way to deal with this other than a few counterspells, so it's probably best to focus on them next. The deck gets a little bit complicated when it comes to resource management. You need to know when's the right time to play a creature, play a draw spell, buff your commander, or hold up protection for another turn. Because of this, it's a very skill-expressive deck, but it can teach a new player a lot of things about the game, and it's also relatively cheap, coming in at only $69. I highly recommend you play this deck. It's been very fun, and especially if you're a fan of snakes. The next deck I have for you is a deck that we've already covered on the channel previously, but with just a few minor tweaks. Kutzil Malamet Exemplar is an amazing Selesnya Anthems deck. This deck is a very low-to-the-ground aggro deck, with most of your creatures being the anthems themselves. Each creature comes onto the board, buffs one another, and allows you to swing in and draw through more of your deck. Your goal should be to play some of the smaller ramp pieces on the first couple turns, then start playing your anthems, and then cast your Kutzil. You want to have at least 2 or 3 buffed creatures before you start swinging with Kutzil, as otherwise you might seem like you're a bit too far ahead. And as an aggro deck, you might start getting attention before you want it. Make sure to use your resources wisely and only cast a creature anthem when you know that you need more power on the table. You don't want to just dump your whole hand onto the table as you're begging for a board wipe. However, because board wipes are such a huge thing, we run a bit of protection that can help us stop that. We have Surge of Salvation, Sajiri Shelter, Make a Stand, Unbreakable Formation, and Rootborn Defenses. These are all going to help us make sure that our board doesn't get wiped so fast. Then of course, because we are aggro, we need a way to get over the hump. Our creatures will already be super buffed because of these anthems, but we need a way to give them even more buffs and some trample. We have about 7 overrun effects in the deck, as well as a wild Beastmaster that is a pseudo overrun, just with no trample. This deck is a lot of fun, it's really powerful, and it's super cheap, coming in at only $59. I highly recommend giving this one a try. Our next deck asks the question, do you really need friends? Yurlok of Scorch Thrash is a group slug deck that I've put together. 3 colors in budget is a little bit tricky, but if you're okay with tap lands and a little bit slower gameplay, this one is the deck for you. Our goal with this deck is to get our opponent's life total as low as possible and end the game with an assortment of 4 different game-winning spells: Crackle with Power, Exsanguinate, Ribbons, and Jaya's Immolating Inferno. Casting these spells at around turn 9 or turn 10 is a great way to end the game off. In the meantime, our goal is to stop our opponents as much as possible from developing a board state and killing us off. We have some pretty standard group slug effects that affect the entire table, such as Mana Barbs and Citadel of Pain, and our commander Yurlok is also one of these cards, giving all of our opponents mana burn. Because of that, we have mana doublers like Mana Flare and Heartbeat of Spring, and we also try to make as much mana as possible for ourselves. We also have 4 different ways of keeping this mana in Ashling the Flame Dancer, Omnath, Leyline Tyrant, and Horizon Stone. These all make sure that we're not losing to mana burn, but everyone else still is. So the overall goal of the deck is to slow your opponents down and stop the strategies that stop you from winning the game. Because of this, we run a lot of the cards that have the effect your opponents cannot gain life. Any life gain deck is going to stop this deck from succeeding. So we need to make sure that life gain decks are not able to function properly. Then we can just cast a couple group slug effects that will make sure our opponents are taking residual damage. We then have plenty of removal and interaction that can sweep our opponent's board if they try to aggro us out. Cards like Chain Reaction, Blasphemous Act, and Brotherhood's End are great options and includes. And our third goal is to try to make as much mana as possible to sink into these game-winning effects. We also have ways of getting these cards back in case we can only cast 1 per game, like Regrowth and Reclaim. This deck is super mean, super fun, and is always a great time for you. Maybe not so much your friends. And this deck comes in at only $86. Our next deck asks the question, have you ever wanted to play Pokemon in Magic the Gathering? Lazav, Wearer of Faces, is an awesome Voltron-y style deck that has a really interesting play pattern. Essentially, you want to loot through your deck and get some powerful creatures into your graveyard. We have a lot of looting effects like Rona, Looter Ilkor, and Vohar that allow us to discard cards from our hand and fill up our graveyard with these insanely powerful creatures that normally would be effects of some heavy removal. Lazav allows us to exile these creatures from our graveyard and then turn into these creatures in the game. Similar to Kaseto, you really want to focus down the players that are going wide. Because you don't have many ways to stop going wide besides something like an Aetherized, you need to make sure that they are being targeted first. We also run quite a bit of protection for Lazav, either through counter magic or making sure he can't be targeted by things. This is a super interesting deck and it's a very fun play around. This also happens to be our most expensive deck, coming in at $99. Now the last commander deck that I want to talk about for you today is a deck that I find super interesting. If you've seen my channel or you know anything about me as a player, you know that I love going wide, I love tokens, and I love combat. So who would have guessed I would have made an aggro deck in Boros of all things? Gut True Soul Zealot is typically a background commander run with an artifact theme. However, I decided to give him Inspiring Leader as his background. Because you have Inspiring Leader as your background, every time you attack, you're getting a 6/3 black skeleton creature with menace. That is what I call a powerhouse. Imagine Othari, but a bit scrappier and just a bit more complicated. Gut True Zealot allows us to use our creature tokens that come out and turn them into huge 6/3 black skeleton creatures. Your goal for the deck is to run one of our super cheap creatures that also make tokens on the first couple turns of the game, find a way to get a regenerating token maker, and grind out the game from there. We have a few bombs that kind of allow us to end the game later in Warstorm Surge, True Conviction, Legion Loyalty, and Aggravated Assault, which is just a huge mana dump on later turns of the game. These all allow you to get even extra value out of your huge skeletons. And cards like Loyal Apprentice, Karizev, Siege Gang Lieutenant, and Prava of the 2nd Legion allow you to continuously get those 6/3s every single turn. This deck was extremely fun to make, and it's also extremely fun to play. Just like any go wide deck, our biggest problem are board wipe. So we run plenty of those protection effects as well. Rootborn Defenses is a huge one in this, as it lets us get just another 6/3 skeleton. Our most expensive and yet biggest performer is a card from the new Blimbrower set, Caretaker's Talent. Caretaker's Talent on its final form is just another Inspiring Leader, but it allows us to draw cards, copy a token, and then give us that anthem. If you for some reason don't want to spend the money on something like Caretaker's Talent, you can always just replace it with an Intangible Virtue. Paladin's Class is another great one, almost acting as a pseudo overrun effect for us. In an aggro deck like this, we really want to focus down any kind of controlling players. We don't really need to worry about going wide, as in most cases we will go wider, or with Menace we'll be able to just attack right through them, as our tokens will be bigger than theirs. So more of the control-y decks, the the Spellslinger decks, and the Go Big decks are the kind of decks we want to target down first. Gut is an extremely fun commander, and I highly recommend anybody that's interested in these decks try out him first. This deck runs at only $64, so pretty much the price of your normal precon. All of these decks are super fun and super effective at what they do. If you're looking to spice up your next commander game, take a look at these decks. And also, follow me on Moxfield and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.